Now, is everyone aware of Don't Rush to Crush? Mostly. Does anyone have access to it? No. They're creating an e version. I emailed them about it because obviously we all need access. It's so good. I don't know, I know it's hard to get access to it, but all of your questions are answered when you get trouble with medications. So I've moved on from the behavioural strategies now, but you are going to get a lot of people who are non-compliant with medications, who'll spit them out, who'll not take them, and you will always get referrals to solve that problem. And it's really hard because then the doctors come and ask you about something that ends in "ine" and if it can be crushed, and you don't know what that is. So just, if you can direct them to Don't Rush to Crush, most pharmacists have it. So if you're operating privately or in a different setting, someone needs to go to the pharmacist and get access to that. Most pharmacies have it. And if they don't, ring around till you get it. It's worth it. All right, as always, oral care. I'll just draw your attention to the most pertinent ones for me, or I don't know. This is what I do. Obviously, we all have our different strategies for disability and for dementia. I don't use mouthwash for anyone on thickened fluids. I use bicarb swabs. You can order them through the chemist. Take one to the chemist and say, "Get me this." Denture adhesive. Low foaming toothpaste if you're on thickened fluids. Now, the low foaming toothpaste, the best ones I've found are Oral 7, Biotene. The kids' toothpaste is quite low foaming, but it's not minty, it's bubblegum flavour, so it depends what your resident wants. And the sensitive toothpastes are quite low foaming as well. So yeah, that's a really easy solve. Saliva substitute. Now, I have swapped my preference. Some helpful information came to me from someone at the back. I've swapped from Biotene Oral Balance Gel, I think it was called, is that right, to Oral 7. Oral Balance Gel does not have the protective enzyme for oral thrush in it anymore, but Oral 7 does. It is also 17% cheaper. You can use that. That's how we sold it to Hammond Care. So if you need to, I have a research project on it, and if you need one to barrack for swapping to Oral 7, I'm happy to share, and they will save money, and that's all they need to know. And the last thing is Nilstat. I swab on Nilstat. I don't drop on Nilstat if you're on thickened fluids, so you need a cotton swab and you swab it onto the tongue. Gentle touch and soothing speech. And sometimes you might feel like you're being condescending, but a gentle touch on the hand and some soothing speech actually has been proven to improve nutrition. It's so simple. We just need good training programs about feeding as well. Classical music. If someone can feed themselves, don't feed them. It seems so elementary. And I find myself saying it all the time to nurses. He can feed himself. I know it's hard. It's going to take him an hour. He still needs to feed himself. And that's in rehab. So, number one, food first approach. Try and get them to eat rather than giving them supplements. Minimise distractions and get creative. So the question is, it's a question about small, more frequent meals in a facility because there's no staffing and it's not on the menu, etc., etc. Yes, I'm very familiar with this. What kind of facility? Oh, aged care. And do you have a cook fresh kitchen? Do they cook on site or they cook fresh? Who writes? The cook doesn't come into function. Okay. Well, do you mean in general or for those with dysphagia? Sorry, say again. Yeah. Look, to be honest, I'm experiencing the same thing myself, and it's never going to be easy. My biggest suggestion to you is start with one recipe, just one thing, and work out, have you got a dietitian you can work closely with? In a couple of places. So you have a dietitian in a couple of places. Okay. I'll speak from my experience, and I'm fortunate that I have just 3 central people I work with for the dietetics department. Take a single recipe to them and start on your first recipe. And I've found that I've had to tackle it not as a conglomerate of mid-meals. I've had to tackle it as this month I will get vanilla and semolina and almond fudge on the tea trolley, and that's it. And then they have a tea trolley list. Do you have tea trolley lists?
No, it's small, so everybody knows.
Everyone knows everyone. My wards, even when they're small, we have a list that says Joe Bloggs, bed 1, has to be given custard at this meal, has to be given, I don't know, pureed fruit at this meal. Like, it's very explicit, and the tea trolley people have to give what's on there. But in terms of tackling the catering stuff themselves, I would make it yourself at home and take it to them and then say, this only took me 5 minutes, and then work on one recipe. I actually brought a recipe for everyone. I think it's in the middle of your tables. You can take that.
You're talking about food that's cold. Often the argument is you can't really eat food.
Yeah.
Regulations and blah, blah, blah. So
yeah.
Your suggestion is to have cold food and usually sweet food then?
Yes, and that was a great thing for you to say. Yes, it is usually sweet food. I don't want to be the person that keeps talking about their book, but I have to be at this point. I agree with you. We've just developed a stack of finger food savoury options because we have the same problem as you. It's the red one. Hang on. This one. This one came out on Friday last week, and it's all finger food, but there's a few like veggie options. There's meal plans for someone who needs smaller, more frequent meals. So I would start with like a savoury recipe and go from there. The recipe I've given you, which I think is vanilla and almond semolina fudge, that was in our previous book as chocolate. It's actually a recipe you can play with yourself. So if you take that to your chef, you could make that a savoury recipe. You could turn that into pumpkin and chive. As long as there's a semolina base, that stodge base, that will set it to be compliant. So I would suggest that. Then it's being served cold. I don't serve hot on mid-meals unless I go and physically do it myself. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Now, this is probably my passion area. Your compliance with modified diet and fluids, particularly with those with dementia, will just go through the roof if you can be innovative. It will require you to go into the kitchen. Don't be scared. Just experiment. Cover your kitchen sink in thickened jelly that won't thicken because xanthan doesn't react well with gelatin, just so you know. Like, do what you need to do to make it happen. So I'll talk to you quickly about these options. So thickened drinks, foams, moulds, finger foods, soaking, and thickened ice cream. When you're doing it, think about what sensors you're using. If you're only giving someone something bland tasting, great, it's a finger food, but it doesn't taste good. Just before I forget, I did talk about reseasoning. If you have a kitchen modifying meals and you're finding compliance is low, if they're not double seasoning, no one's going to eat it. So you actually need to, you've made your pulled pork for the day, so everyone's getting pulled pork, and now you're going to puree the pork. Once I've pureed it, I know I've already flavoured that, but you actually need to flavour it for a second time, just as much as you did the first time. The liquids that you have added and the modification process dilutes everything. So you will have people tell you it's tasteless because it kind of is. You have to be reseasoning. So that's a very simple solution. All right, so hydration-wise, the dietitians will love you if you can nail the hydration and mention it every now and then. Now, thicken water and put it in ice cube trays. Easy solution. You can freeze pre-thickened fluids, pour it in an ice cube tray. I think I've got in my fridge at the moment like pre-thickened iced coffee and extremely thick in ice cube trays, just ready to go. Easy solution. You can get ice cube trays with clips on the top that will make them food safety compliant. You can cover them. Now, freezing the pre-thickened creamy products. So this is why I say if anyone's a foodie in the room, take an idea that you see on MasterChef and just give it a go, because you might find something that people don't know. It's just worth playing around with whatever you can do, and if you have a good idea, run with it because it'll work. So yeah, it'll remain compliant. It's the xanthan gum-based thickeners are freeze-thaw compliant. Pre-thickened creamy products. I have done this most often with the Flavor Creations ones. I haven't experimented with Nestle yet, sorry. But I have made Neapolitan. I had a man come in with developmental disability and he stopped eating. He just stopped. He had an NG tube. Now I can tell you stories because I have more time. He had a big teddy, so he went everywhere with his teddy, and he came to our rehab ward, which is a really scary place for a 41-year-old who'd never left home. He had his mum there. I don't actually know if he was ever referred to ADDIC, which was the first question I asked. He'd never seen a communication book, so I knew no one in this room had been involved. And because it's the first thing I made. So he came in with an NG. He lost 25 kilos. He stopped eating. He was intubated. They ended up jamming his vocal folds. He had vocal fold palsy, silently aspirating. It was just ridiculous. We didn't know if he was going to make it in a subacute setting, which is a bit sad. Bless his little heart. So for a few days he lived on thickened coffee, So I was thickening the coffee to extremely thick, and he had a little chart about how to make it himself, and the OT worked on that chart and did that together. Then he had a regime about his oral care for how many times he has to do this. So he counted, and if he did it right, he got a picture of his teddy on his teddy chart. And we ended up making him just in normal ice block molds, just supermarket ones. I made like Neapolitan ice creams with the Flavour Creations pre-thickened. So there's creamy dairy, creamy chocolate, creamy strawberry. And what I discovered is extremely thick. If you layer extremely thick, you don't need to wait for each level to set. You can just kind of gloop it on top of each other. Freeze it. Out of the freezer, sit it out for about half an hour at room temperature, and it's just like ice cream. And he put on 10 kilos and he went home 3 months ago. So it is worth they were in my staff fridge for a month, like just waiting for him to eat them. What else? Cookies and cream. I melted, is that up there? Yes. Let me think of a good cookie. I happened to use the Nourish protein cookies that Flavour Creations makes, or whatever cookie you want. Boiling water, you actually need quite a lot, like 1/3 of a cup for one cookie. Pour it on top, break up the biscuit. If the biscuit's super duper hard, like an Anzac, you actually need to break it up quite finely. About 1/3 of a cup of boiling water, so it'll break down the biscuit and it'll become mush. Mix it through. I wouldn't recommend the creamy dairy because there's not enough flavour. If you mix it through the creamy chocolate, or you could make a swirl with the creamy dairy, and it's cookies and cream ice cream. So I know it sounds labour intensive, but if you just have a fun morning one day, and you can chuck it in the freezer, or make a recipe for your cooks if you get a good cook. We talked about ice block molds. The pre-thickened cordials work really well, or even if you just use Thicken Up Clear, Instant Thick, whatever you've got, just not guar. Just whatever it is, not guar. Thicken up some cordial and make ice blocks. Thicken up Coke and make cola ice blocks. I think we did that this summer because the ward was 40 degrees and people were missing out on ice blocks, but we made them Coca-Cola thickened ice blocks. Thickened coffee. So if you pre or post thickened coffee, get your thickened ice cubes, put the thickened ice cubes in the thickened coffee, and if you've frozen some creamy dairy or some creamy chocolate, then you use that as your ice cream component, and you've got a perfectly compliant summer treat. So dietitians will love you. If you even just recommend one of these things, they'll just go bananas.